Well, you're watching Press TV's News Review, where we look deeper into some of the top stories of the day. Stay tuned, everybody. On this news review, Brexit chief negotiator for the European Union has blamed the UK for the lack of progress in the post-divorce trade talks between the two sides. Michel Barnier accused London of slowing down the discussions on fundamental issues while refusing to extend the post-Brexit transition period beyond the end of 2020. He also criticized the British government for, quote, failing to negotiate substantially on a future trade deal. Barnier stressed that Brussels will not accept selective progress on a limited set of issues. The EU's official also warned the clock was ticking for the two sides.
More than ever, the clock is ticking. More than ever. We barely have 8 months ahead of us to carry out 3 projects at the same time. 1, to make sure that the withdrawal agreement is properly implemented, as I have just said. 2, to prepare for the economic consequences at the end of the transition period. There will be consequences. There will be changes. 3, to negotiate a future partnership and to achieve a successful partnership agreement.
Britain left the EU in January. However, its withdrawal from the bloc will complete in December. The UK has stayed in the EU single market during the transition period, and the two sides are holding talks to reach an agreement on their post-Brexit relations. The transition period can be extended, but a decision about it has to be made by the end of June. Brussels has called on London to extend the period amid the coronavirus outbreak in Europe. And joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have editor of Politics First, Marcus Papadopoulos, joining us from London. Also joining us from Plymouth, we have journalist and commentator James Tweedy. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Marcus Papadopoulos in London. The Brexit chief negotiator for the European Union is blaming the UK for the lack of progress. Whose fault is it?
Well, I think it's unreasonable for Michel Barnier to lament the slow progress of the UK government in concluding a trade deal with the EU, when Britain, like the EU, has been in lockdown for coming up to 2 months. And because Britain has been in lockdown for nearly 2 months, it is only inevitable that the British government is preoccupied in confronting COVID-19 and the consequences that COVID-19 has brought to Britain. And the same can be applied to the European Union. There has been slow progress, equally slow progress, on behalf of the EU in trying to conclude a trade deal with Britain, because the EU has also been in lockdown, and the EU has also been preoccupied in trying to effectively confront the dire consequences of the lockdown. But I do expect that once Prime Minister Boris Johnson returns from Chequers to Downing Street, that he will insert momentum into trade talks. And we also have to acknowledge that at the beginning of the year, Britain and the EU had until the 31st of December 2020 to conclude a trade deal. Now, to the layperson, that is a long period of time. But in politics, in business negotiations, that is a very short period of time. Now, that is all the more critical because Britain and the EU will have lost about 2 months because of the consequences of the lockdown in trying to secure a deal. But as I previously said, I believe that once Boris Johnson does return to Downing Street, and once the UK government and likewise the EU start to rescind some of the lockdown measures, then momentum will be increased on behalf of both sides to conclude that trade deal by the end of the year, which is beneficial for both Britain and the European Union. And I might add as well that in the context of Britain, the situation is not being helped by MPs, in particular Blairite Labour MPs, who are using the COVID-19 and the consequences of the lockdown to call on the British government to extend Britain withdrawing from the European Union, because those MPs, and as I said, Blairite MPs, undoubtedly have an ulterior motive in calling for an extension. And that ulterior motive is to try and keep Britain in the European Union by the back door, which demonstrates that these Blairite MPs, some of the most wretched politicians you will ever come across, it demonstrates that they have not learnt the lessons stemming from Labour's catastrophic election defeat in December 2019, namely that Jeremy Corbyn lost that election because of his U-turn on Brexit. And if those Blairite MPs honestly expect the British public to reconnect with a Labour Party that is still pushing for Britain to stay within the European Union, then it really demonstrates that Labour is in a dire, dire situation.
James Tweedy, Mr. Papadopoulos pretty much covered everything there. I'd like to get your thoughts on the situation. It's as if the Brexit negotiations weren't convoluted enough. Throw the coronavirus in there. The EU's official has stated that the clock is ticking now for the two sides. Do you think the post-Brexit transition period should be extended now?
No. Barnier's comments today are just an extension of this kitchen sink that the EU Commission has taken, kitchen sink approach to the deal that the EU Commission has taken for about 3 years now. You know, the deal must include all sorts of things which have nothing to do with free trade. You know, they're nothing to do with you know, Theresa May was possibly trying to have a close regulatory alignment with the EU, but Boris Johnson isn't now, right? So I mean, you have to read what Barnier actually said. He demanded a level playing field on competition because the EU is kind of terrified that Britain will outcompete them, even though France and Germany are supposed to be far more, you know, their industry is supposed to be far more technologically advanced than ours, right? Governance of the deal. He wants to talk about governance. In other words, who adjudicates on disputes? Well, you know, can't the governments of the Britain and the EU countries work that out between them? Why do you need an independent panel or the European Court of Justice to do that? And he talks about justice, but most importantly, he talks about fisheries, because the EU wants to continue allowing very large super trawlers to come into Britain's exclusive economic zone, and even its territorial waters up to 6 miles from the coast, as it does under the common fisheries policy at the moment, and scoop up all our fish stocks. You know, Britain, by nature of being a very large island nation, has an exclusive economic zone that's it's a crescent about 1,000 miles long. Now, you in Iran know about that, don't you? You don't want the Saudis and the Bahrainis drilling for oil and gas in your exclusive economic zone on your side of the Persian Gulf, right? So neither do we want French and Dutch super trawlers coming into our waters. So this is how it is. But what can we say? Also, I mean, I agree with Marcus there about Labour's approach. They've shot themselves in the foot, because as soon as the Labour Party demanded that the talks be extended, then they made it a partisan political issue. And of course, the Tories said, no, we won't extend. And you can see the result, because the latest polls put the Conservative Party 20 points ahead of Labour. This is ABC politics, nursery school politics. This is a no-brainer. So, what can we say? Barnier is complaining because Barnier is taking this EU approach that the EU will continue to have jurisdiction in various spheres over Britain to prevent Britain from ever threatening the EU at all. But what is the EU now? I mean, we talk about COVID-19, right? COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, and what has that shown? It's shown that there is no solidarity between the EU nations. You know, the EU nations sent no aid at all to Italy when Italy was bearing the brunt, right? It was Russia and China that did that. So, maybe the EU is dead in the water already without
okay, let's leave it there. We're fresh out of time. Thank you, gentlemen. James Tweedy, journalist and commentator, joining us from Plymouth, also editor of Politics First. Marcus Papadopoulos joining us from London. Thank you for contributing to this segment of the program. And that's it with this edition of the News Review. But do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV. Bye for now.